Sind wir das Essen? Nein, es ist gegen diese Welt sind Täter gekriegt.
Alright. Hey assholes. So what actually happens in the show Chernobyl? This show covers the mostly true but a little bit fictionalized story of the Vladimir I. Lenin nuclear power plant and the town of Pripyat, neither of which are called Chernobyl. The show opens up with a dude practicing for his next drive-thru run at McDonald's, where he is going to be asking what is the cost of fries.
What is the cost of lies?
We see establishing shots of some dude's apartment, one of which shows an electricity meter ticking, which is symbolism, I guess. On-screen text then informs us that it is the 26th of April 1988, which does not coincide with reality because what we are about to see happen actually happened on the 27th of April 1988. I don't know why they changed this. Probably because, as we will learn later, this date has more dramatic significance. We finally see who's doing the voiceover narration, and he looks suspiciously like that one captain in the show The Terror who pouts all the time, presumably because they're played by the same actor, so I'm gonna call him Captain Pouty. Some people claim his apartment is much too small and too dingy for someone of his standing, but this is well after the KGB, quote-unquote, made him so immaterial to the world that if he finally does die, it would be exceedingly hard to notice that he ever existed, which is obviously wrong because right now we are watching a TV show about him. This is actually the protagonist of our show, so to speak, and he's complaining about the Soviet state apparatus for reasons which are obvious. I can also relate to him because he says that someone deserves to die, who is Anatoly Dyatlov, who can be considered one of the antagonists of this show, if someone such fully desires. He records all of this on old cassette tapes, much like I recorded Who Deserves to Die on cassette tapes when I was a kid. Except he isn't a kid. We see Pouty Captain finish up this tape. Then we see he actually made a couple of tapes, which he packs up and hides using the cover of throwing out his garbage, because he's being observed by some shady dudes in a car. They're obviously doing a shit job because they didn't notice that he hid that package with the tapes. Much like in a different TV show where someone makes a bunch of tapes and then does the exact same thing that Pouty Captain is gonna do momentarily. Which is something that YouTube has a creepy, unhealthy fetish with censoring. So I'm gonna have to describe it euphemistically. What he's gonna do now is he is going to induct himself into the club of the formerly living. We see him give multiple days worth of food to the one who actually owns this apartment, this cat, and then he waits for a very specific time, which is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which is also the title of this episode. Why does he do that? On this year's supposed 26th of April 1988? Because it's exactly to the second 2 years after the inciting incident of this show, the supercriticality event in Reactor 4. Now, as I said before, in reality, he killed himself 1 day later, but this works better for dramatic purposes, so fuck reality, I guess. After he formally completes his initiation into the club of the formerly living, the cat absolutely positively does not give a fuck and is concerned only with eating, which is very realistic. Although most cats would probably have watched with much joy and glee.
Ja genau, Kiki, du hast auch zugeguckt, oder? Ja genau.
We get a late title card for the show that we all already know is called Chernobyl. We jump back in time by 2 years and 1 minute, although it should actually be 2 years, 1 day and 1 minute, as I have already explained, and we hear some woman vomiting, which is very nice, I guess. We've also jumped from wherever the hell Pouty Captain's apartment was, and we are now in Pripyat in the Ukrainian Soviet Republic. And yes, many people actually think that the thing that we call Chernobyl is in Russia, but it isn't. It is in what is today Ukraine, both of which were at the time the Soviet Union. This is Lyudmila Ignatenko, who just vomited around because she's pregnant, but we don't know that yet. She has very little character in this show beyond just being the wife of Vasily Ignatenko, whom she creepily watches sleeping. He is also played by an actor who was in that other show, The Terror. In that show, he played a guy who wasn't actually, but had taken on the identity of one Cornelius Hickey, so I will just call him Corny here. As for the wife, let's just call her Cornwife. Far in the distance, we see a bunch of flashes of light. Cornwife doesn't see him because she only steps to the window after it happened, but then she hears and feels the tremor because they didn't bother to sync up the audio and the video. Connie gets awoken and come out of bed, and they both look out of the window and see something that looks exactly like the World Trade Center Memorial. We see someone being called upon, but he doesn't react. This is a guy who was mentioned by Captain Pouty before, and it's Anatoly Dyatlov, who is, according to everyone, even his own friends, a massive asshole, so I'm just gonna call him the asshole. The asshole orders his fellow nuclear engineers around in order to contain the accident, which he wrongfully believes is just the explosion of a control system tank, when a dude bursts in, telling them the core has exploded and it no longer exists. The asshole says he's just in shock and tells them to get him out of here, which became not only an internet meme, but also one of the moments in the show that are misquoted most often. These two people, who are Akimov and Toktonov, speak amongst one another, and for the first time the line gets uttered, "We did everything right."
Don't worry, we did everything right. Something strange has happened. Do you taste metal?
Which they actually have all right to believe, because the Soviet nuclear industry gave them wrong information to go off of. One of them remarks that they can taste metal, before Akimov, at the behest of Comrade Asshole, explains to the dude who just rushed in that the core can't explode. Comrade Asshole walks to a different part of the building to do something, and through the window he can see the roof, on which there is no graphite. He didn't see graphite because there isn't any there. We then get a close-up shot of some graphite, which he didn't see because it isn't there. Connie gets ready to do his job as a firefighter, but Connie's wife doesn't want him to do his firefighting job, remarking that there might be a distant possibility that there could be some chemicals near the nuclear power plant. The Cherenkov radiation, which we saw earlier, gets hand-waved as probably just some floodlights or something. We cut back to the power plant where someone is walking around broken down hallways to find a dosimeter, which is a device that tells you how much radiation is in the air or something. In the room where the dosimeter is stored, some loser cowers under a desk, believing it's war and that the Americans have just conducted an airstrike on a nuclear power plant because that would be very intelligent. We learn that the dosimeter is useless because it only shows up to 3.6 Röntgen per hour, but they all know the real number right now is actually much higher. This person, who is also called Valery, not to be confused with Valery Legasov, tells this scared loser to get some asshole called Shashanuk and says he will go look for Hodemchuk. Hodemchuk was never found and was presumably right next to the core when it exploded, which leads most people to believe that he got instantly vaporized, or crushed by debris, I don't fucking know. Oh, whose first name, by the way, is also Valery. Every fucking asshole here is called Valery. Valery then encounters a bunch of interns who've been told to go to the reactor room to see what's up. Yes, they're sending interns into the reactor hall after an explosion has destroyed parts of the building. On the search for Hodemchuk, because they don't know he's gone yet, we see a bird inside of the building, which would also mean that radiation is already getting out of the building. Later in the show, a bird just drops dead out of the sky. Some people claim this is that same bird, but I don't think that is true. Comrade Asshole gets back to the control room from earlier, where he gets informed that even though he manually lowered the control rods, they're actually not lowered at all. Then they talk a bit about having water flow through the core because that is necessary, because otherwise it might be, I don't know, fucking maybe overheat or something, because they still don't know that it's already gone. We get another internet meme moment from Comrade Asshole when he asks what the dosimeter says, and even though the dude, I think it's Akimov, tries to tell him it only shows 3.6 Röntgen because it only goes up to 3.6 Röntgen, Comrade Asshole decides to take that number at face value and says
3.6. Not great, not terrible.
Akimov then once again says the very memed line,
We did everything right.
A time card says it's now 1:30 and the fire brigade arrives in force, who still believe it's just burning tar and don't know that they're going to be exposed to a lot of radiation. Considering that the explosion happened at 1:23 and a little bit of time must have had passed before they made the call, that is actually a really impressive response time for the fire brigade. Firefighter Corny and his fellow firefighters start fighting the fire, when one of Firefighter Corny's fellow firefighters picks up something that kinda looks like graphite, but it isn't graphite because obviously there's no graphite there. Corny tells him to stop fucking around with some rock and do his job, and once again there's a mention of a strange metally taste. This big strong man, who I believe is Yuvchenko, carries this smaller and currently very weak man, who I believe is Victor, when he encounters the trainees or interns or whatever who are supposed to go to the reactor hall. But they can't get in because the door is quote-unquote jammed. But in reality, those kids are just too weak and nerdy to open the door. So Yevchenko goes with them to open it for him. We cut back to the outside of the building, where firefighter Corny's fellow firefighter friend is writhing in pain. The hand with which he held the object that definitely wasn't graphite because there's no graphite, having become red and swollen and all blistery, even though he had worn gloves. He then makes a noise that is very similar to Voldemort's iconic stupid laugh. The dude playing firefighter Corny then does a very good job of acting, because even though he says nothing, we can clearly read on his face that he's thinking what in the fuck is even going on here, and pondering that maybe it's not just a fire, and maybe there are chemicals. We cut back to the inside, where Yevchenko and one of the weakling nerds try opening the jammed door, while the other nerd just stands there not helping. After they opened it up a crack, Yevchenko wedges himself into the crack and braces the door open with his exceedingly masculine back and shoulder party. The little trainee weakling nerd noobs go and gaze upon the core, which is now very much like a Lovecraftian cosmic horror monster, in that even looking at it alone is probably going to kill you. They run away and leave Yevchenko behind, who has now started to bleed everywhere where he touched anything at all, because radiation is fun like that. We cut back to the town of Pripyat, where Korniwife gets invited by a gathering of people who are all going to go to the railroad bridge to watch the fire. Because they live in the Soviet Union and watching a fire is the most exciting thing that has ever happened to them in the entirety of all of their lives. One of the townspeople tries to comfort Korniwife by saying that neither he nor any of the other firefighters have ever gotten hurt before, so they're probably going to be fine. Which is probably a nice gesture, but doesn't really make any sense at all if you think about it. Like, I've never been shot in the face with a shotgun. But if I were to be shot in the face in the shotgun, even though it has never happened to me and I have never suffered any injuries because of that, I would probably not feel very good afterwards. I mean, I'd probably look better, but still. Anyway, Korniwife's friend then tells Korniwife to get some rest, mere seconds after saying that nobody can sleep anyway because of the sirens. We get back to the control room, where Toptunov, Akimov, and Comrade Asol are discussing how the control system tank could probably cause that explosion. Yeah, maybe, but it was probably that, it was probably not the core. When one of the trainees bursts in and tells them the core is in fact gone, having also started to bleed all over his entire body and all his skin is red now and he's gonna probably die, and where's even the other trainee? He's nowhere to be seen, maybe he just dropped dead on the way, very possible. Comrade Asol says another meme line, which always gets conflated with his earlier meme line, to make wrong quotes. The nerd intern guy then gets asked where is Kudryastov, which I assume is the other nerd intern guy, and he just says he fell, not elaborating at all on where or why or what he's done or why he didn't help him. The handheld camera shakes around relatively violently for just standing still in one place, but it is appropriate because of the situation. Comrade Asol then starts to threaten Akimov, making it out like it's Akimov's fault that everything went to shit. We cut to a hospital, where a female doctor is presented to be very competent, whereas a male doctor is presented to be very incompetent, because he doesn't know what iodine tablets are for. As a matter of fact, it seems a bit like the guy doesn't even know that there's a fire going on, even though they can see it from the room they're in. So maybe he's just senile or something. By the way, can I just say, these are pregnant women that are about to deliver their babies in less than a day. And they're lying here in these weird-ass, cold-ass contraptions that look like the most uncomfortable thing to ever sit upon since the throne of games in Game of Thrones. We have a nice little J-cut.
Why would we have iodine pills?
To the second of the three people who could be considered the antagonists of this show. This is Nikolai Fomin, who is in charge of the entire power plant. And if his hair and weird voice didn't make it clear already, he's very evil. He reminds me of an equally heinous and also very terrible person who also has a strange voice and a weird haircut. So I'm just gonna call him Bob Ross. So, turns out I just mixed up the second and the third antagonists. And that isn't actually Nikolai Fomin, that is Viktor Brikhanov. But it doesn't matter because I'm still gonna call him Bob Ross. And Nikolai Fomin is actually this guy, who, with his male pattern baldness and his horn-rimmed glasses, looks like a stereotypical teacher, so I'm just gonna call him Stereotypical Teacher. Because his appearance didn't give that away already, Bob Ross immediately presents himself as an asshole, by just ignoring and walking past his friend and colleague Fomin while he's talking. Our three bad guys, Comrade Asshole, the stereotypical teacher, and Bob Ross, all meet down in some kind of radiation shelter. Bob Ross chastises Comrade Asshole, but not because he exploded a nuclear power plant and put loads of lives in danger. No, but because he has to ring up his superiors now and tell them that shit has hit the fan. When asked what happened, Comrade Asshole recounts the false narrative of the control system tank exploding, which stereotypical teacher comments on is the quote-unquote only logical explanation. 3.6 Röntgen gets thrown around again, which once again gets taken at face value and described as not great but not horrifying. Even though 3.6 Röntgen per hour is actually pretty horrifying, if you kind of think about it for a second. We cut to the previously mentioned railroad bridge, which by the way has the nickname the Bridge of Death because supposedly everyone who watched the fire from there died, which is probably not true. Anyway, Corny Wife's annoying friend who was being annoying and condescending before is now very annoying and condescending to this asshole who is presumably her husband. She makes fun of him for him thinking it's probably the fuel after she literally seconds ago just asked him what he thinks. What a fucking bitch. They make a point of showing dust and sand and people's hair flying about, presumably representing all the radioactive terribleness that is floating through the air right now. All while Hildurgunnardóttir's excellent but misleadingly named track The Bridge of Death plays. Back inside the power plant, Valery Pervozchenko finds Valery Yuvchenko, who's collapsed onto the floor, and offers him help. Yuvchenko just bleakly says that it's too late and it's all over and just wants a cigarette. Because you know what's more important than living? Nicotine. Water starts falling down on top of them, which first seems like rain, but we then see it's actually the firefighters working their way up the building and constantly spraying water everywhere, which will become a major plot point later. Akimov and Pervozchenko debate about going to some kind of valves and opening them manually to get water into the core. By now Pervozchenko has realized that the core is gone and says it would be useless, but Akimov and also Toptonov have still not accepted that, so they go to open those valves. Pervozchenko makes this comment here.
Pump water into a ditch, there's nothing there.
Which would have led into a scene that got deleted where we see water being uselessly pumped into nothingness. In front of the power plant, they find the one person who knows where the good dosimeter is, that isn't limited to 3.6 Röntgen, so they go get it. We then jump back into the radiation room from earlier, and to 5:20 AM, where a bunch of disgustingly Soviet-looking, brown and grey wearing, grim expression apparatchik people come in. This is the local executive committee. Special attention is directed towards an old, frail man who sits at the end of the corner. He's just named Tsarkov and is supposedly a fictional representation of the Soviet apparatus. He kinda looks like Mr. Luvin or whatever his name is from Game of Thrones, presumably because he's played by the same actor. So I'm just gonna call him Meister. Our trio of bad explain the situation to all of these suit and tie wearing assholes, claiming that everything is under control and safe. But some of these motherfuckers are smart enough not to believe them. Bob Ross argues that it's safe enough that he's letting his wife stay here, and that if he can let his wife die of radiation poisoning, everyone else can do the same. After some arguing back and forth, the Grand Meister person finally stands up and is like, yeah, the Soviet state apparatus will handle things perfectly like it always does, because the Soviet state apparatus has never made any mistakes and will never make any mistakes, and nothing bad has ever come from the Soviet state apparatus, has it? He further goes on to say that they're going to lock down the city, let no one leave, cut all the phone lines, and make this very, very suspicious move in order to quote-unquote keep the minds of the people on their labor. Because if I would see a burning power plant from my house and I would just get told everything is fine, keep the minds on my labor, I would obviously be very calm and not panic at all. Bob Ross starts to applaud, and the rest of the committee, they all applaud the Grandmeister person for being a fucking asshole and for wanting to hide the fact from the public that they're all in mortal danger. And then they all leave. Sitnikov, the one dude from earlier who knew where the good dosimeter was, gets called in to report and says that as soon as they turned the dosimeter on, it instantly burned out, like that one time when Homer Simpson got connected to a polygraph.
I'll ask you a few yes or no questions, and you just answer truthfully. Do you understand?
Yes.
He then goes on to say that they used another dosimeter, some kind of military firefighter kind of dosimeter, which goes up to 200 Röntgen, and that it maxed out.
It maxed out.
Our trio of big bad don't believe him and think he's full of shit, because it's not like the core exploded or anything, it's just some ruptured condenser lines. How the fuck could there be 200 Röntgen from ruptured condenser lines? I mean, the fucking core would have to explode or something for there to be more than 200 Röntgen. And the core obviously didn't explode. Because how the fuck would the core explode? It's not like we saw graphite or anything. Although Sitnikov says that he did saw graphite. Comrade Asshole, very quietly and calmly, about as calmly as Dumbledore did,
You didn't! Because it's not there!
informs Sitnikov that in fact he didn't see graphite because there isn't any graphite. Now it is unclear whether Comrade Asshole is just lying to save face, or whether he really believes that all of the black, smoldering debris that looks exactly like graphite that he saw is in fact not graphite. To clear this shit up once and for good, Comrade Asshole says he will go to the vent block roof, from where you can see into the reactor. But then he starts vomiting all over the place. Now one could think it's because he has been hit by dangerous levels of radiation, but it's probably unrelated. Anyway, stereotypical teacher guy tells Sitnikov to go up there instead and look into the reactor. Sitnikov understandably refuses, because he knows if he does that, he's probably gonna die. But teacher guy assures him he'll be fine, whilst Bob Ross subtly brings in a military guy in the background who is gonna force Sitnikov to go up to the roof. Very subtle and clever show-don't-tell kind of filmmaking. I like it. We see Akimov and Toptunov wading through the radiation-infested water, trying to open those valves they were talking about earlier. So this is probably where the deleted scene would have went, where water gets pumped into nothing. Anyway, they've kind of come to the realization that it's pointless what they're doing, but they're gonna keep doing it anyway. Then we cut to Sitnikov with his one military escort enforcer person on the vent block roof. He looks into the reactor building, sees that the reactor exploded, and turns around tensionfully, the skin on his face already having turned red from the radiation. Comrade Asshole gets carried away to the hospital or wherever, and we see other injured and sick people, and other people trying to help them. With just music playing and no dialogue, we see Sitnikov having returned to the shelter with the stereotypical teacher and Bob Ross, the former of which shouts at and berates Sitnikov, presumably for confirming that the reactor has exploded. Competent female doctor from earlier wakes up because there's a lot of racket. Ambulances are pulling up by the dozens, and droves of sick people have appeared at the hospital. We then cut to the best character in the show, this cat, and the cat's resident can opener, Pouty Captain. He answers the phone to one Boris Sherbina, who died 4 years after being to Pripyat. But his death had absolutely nothing to do with nuclear radiation. The fact that the Soviet Union made it illegal to cite radiation poisoning as a cause of death has probably nothing to do with that, and is probably just a coincidence. We can't see him yet, but this guy looks suspiciously like Bootstrap Bill Turner, presumably because they're played by the same actor, so I'm just gonna call him Bootstrap Bill. Bootstrap Bill informs his fellow seaman, Pouty Captain, that there's been an accident at the nuclear power plant in Pripyat, but that everything is definitely under control and it's totally safe and no one is in danger and he should come there and help. Bootstrap Bill, who later becomes a really amazing character, starts off as a fucking annoying asshole and ends the phone call while Pouty Captain is still talking. No more dialogue or plot happens, but instead we just see random shots of the power plant, the town of Pripyat, the woods around it, some children playing, and finally that bird I mentioned earlier, who may or may not be the same bird that was in the power plant, who's now lying dead on the floor. The credits roll, and we see that it was written by Craig Mazin, who has inflicted upon the world the utter garbage that is Scary Movie 3 and 4, Superhero Movie, and also the Hangover films. How the fuck someone who writes retarded imbecile shit like that could go on to create an amazing show like Chernobyl is a question we will probably never get the answer to, much like the question of why the goblin turned on the stove. thus ends my first video about this TV show. Like this video, subscribe to my channel, and comment underneath this video as to why this video is the worst video that you have ever seen in the entirety of your life. And yeah, most of my videos are actually about, you know, playing guitar and making music and stuff. I don't know why I made this. Maybe I'm insane. Who can say, really? What else is there left to say, I suppose, except fuck off?
Send me